And I want to take this one from Tariq Ali, please.
Why is Islam a wicked and vicious faith?
This is a quotation that you made twice, I think, about Islam. It was wicked and vicious. You confirmed it the other day. You start off. Why is it a wicked and vicious faith?
Because it treats women as second-class citizens, because it says that a woman victim of rape should be stoned to death for adultery, and because it orders its followers to be harsh with those of the unbelievers who live near to them, and it ordains as a religious duty the murder of Jews as well as other non-Muslims. That's in the Quran. There's no point shaking your head. There are good points about Islam. For instance, it opposes usury. It wouldn't have let the banks run riot in the way that the Labour Party and the Tory Party have done. There are good points, but it doesn't fit in with the fundamental values of British society: free speech, democracy and equal rights for women.
So what's your policy on Islam?
My policy on Islam is a truce with Islam. I'm not the one with the blood of 800,000 Iraqis on my hands after an illegal war, whereas Jack Straw is. I've never hurt one single Muslim. I believe that the West should stop trying to de-Islamify the Middle East and should leave those sovereign countries to run their own affairs. We shouldn't have gone into Iraq. We must never go into Iran, despite the fact that's where the Tories will take us in due course. We should leave them alone, and we should ensure that if Muslims are staying in this country, they do so on the understanding that our country must remain fundamentally a British and Christian country.
Sorry, can you just explain, if Muslims do stay in this country, what must they do?
They must acknowledge that Britain always has been and must remain, and it's right that it should remain, a fundamentally British and Christian country based on Western democratic values and not on the eternal values of the Quran.
Syeda Warsi?
From that very interesting answer, I can't work out whether he despises Muslims or he thinks they're his best friends. Mr. Griffin is obviously a confused man. Because on the one hand, he says that he doesn't abide by and believe in lots of values that he attributes quite wrongly to Islam. And yet it was Mr. Griffin who was on the front cover of a magazine along with Colonel Gaddafi, Ayatollah Khomeini and Louis Farrakhan, and himself calling himself the New Alliance. It was also Mr. Griffin who shared a platform with Abu Hamza. Many of you may know him as Captain Hook. Most Muslims think he's some nutter from the East End of London, and therefore not even part of the faith of Islam. And yet Mr. Griffin considers him to be a sheikh, i.e. a learned scholar, and he believes that he and Abu Hamza have similar views. Mr. Griffin is a thoroughly deceptive man who comes on here and tries to sell whatever message that he wants. He's no friend of Islam. He is here to demonize Islam, just as he demonizes Christianity. Because, you know, there is nothing Muslim about the likes of Abu Hamza and others who actually preach extremism in the name of that faith. Mr. Griffin here preaches extremism in the name of Christianity and brings that faith into disrepute as well.
I'd like to say to Nick Griffin, travelling is all about education, educating your mind, understanding things. And I'd like to know how much travelling you've done around the world, because that is one sure way of learning the true side of another culture or a religion. How much travelling have you done, Nick?
I've been a lot of the time around Europe to the United States. I went to Libya long before members of the Labour government recently, and I said to the representatives of Gaddafi that before he should do anything else, he should stop funding the IRA, which might be why I never got to meet him.
You wanted him to fund you instead?
Yeah, yes, you did.
The man with spectacles.
You wanted him to fund you instead?
The man with spectacles up there.
That's why he went there.
That's absolutely right.
Thank you very much. I won't attack you, Nick, but I'm proud to be a British Bangladeshi Muslim who has stood for Parliament before in order to try to serve the British public. And I understand the importance of dialogue between communities. However, I find that you're isolating people like myself, the Muslim community, by refusing to engage positively. Instead, you are misrepresenting Islam and scaring people about Islamification. Surely, if that is, if you fear Islamic laws or Sharia laws, then really you should be going after the indigenous Christian community, because you're advocating Christianity. In the last book of the Bible, Revelation, it does say in 2 places that when Christ comes back, his rule will be the rule like a rod of iron, and nations will be smashed like potted clay. So why isolate Muslims and not target Christianity?
Bonnie Greer, no, you've got it.
Well, everybody, we can all lay our stories out and talk about, how we see Britain. We know what Britain is. But this doesn't really matter to Nick. Not really, Nick, not really. What matters to Nick is his own vision of this country, which is these little tiny potted bits of history. For instance, on his site, he starts his history largely in 700 AD. Where's the rest of British history? Where's the Romans? There's a reason the Romans aren't there, because they were a multicultural society. Anybody could be a Roman citizen. And there were armies here of Africans and Asians and Europeans. And when Rome left, those people were left behind. Now, what happened to them? You think they hooked up with your indigenous Ice Age Britons, Nick?
Well,
okay. I'm going to move on to another point, because I think we're getting a bit off beam here. Now, I'll come to Jack in a moment. Just to say before we take this question, that you can follow us on Twitter, BBC Question Time. You can text us 83981 if you want to comment on this programme as it's going along. CFAX page 155 will tell you what others are saying. Push the red button if you're watching digitally. Email us if you would like to do that. Johnny Lyle, please.
Can the recent success of the BNP be explained by the misguided immigration policy of the government?
Jack Straw. Can the recent success of the BNP be explained by the misguided immigration policy of our government?
I don't think it can. We mentioned Enoch Powell earlier. He came out, as Syeda said, and Chris did, remarked with this terrible speech about the rivers of being flown with much blood, a 1968 speech. 1960, he was Minister of Health. And he launched a campaign to recruit Afro-Caribbean people from the West Indies to come to this country to fill vacancies in the National Health Service. I've actually seen the press notice. He went out there. And so it wasn't a Labour government responsible for immigration.
Yeah, but you've been in power now for nearly 12 years. So let's deal with the present, Jack Straw, and not go back to Enoch Powell. Let's deal with the question. Is the rise of the BNP, which has happened very recently, is that because of your government's policies? That's what Johnny Lyle is asking. So can you answer that?
The BNP is a transmogrification from the National Front, the National Party, the British Union of Fascists before this. As Chris has been pointing out, we've long had fringe parties on the right in British politics defining themselves against the other. Originally it was against the Jew, then it was against the Irish, then it was against the Afro-Caribbeans, now it happens to be against the Muslims. As far as immigration is concerned, my point is, we've had a long history of immigration in this country. I scarcely know anybody, certainly not, I'm not one of them, who can say they are true British or true English, because we've all got all kinds of mixtures inside myself.
Are you saying there is no worry about the scale of immigration in this country? Is that the point you're making?
No,
I can't get out what you're saying.
Of course there is a worry. But I also say to you, for example, as the latest figures show, there's been a net reduction in the increase in migration recently. The outflow, because of the downturn, has been greater. And so we are seeking actively to control numbers better. So, for example, we've introduced the points-based system for work permits. And asylum numbers have come down to about a third of where they were. But on the issue of can we pull up the drawbridge and stop people coming to this country? Can we stop people who come from a different country, who are then British citizens, from marrying who they wish to choose from wherever it is in the world? Certainly not, because one of the great strengths of this country is its diversity. And for the future, although of course I understand this very acutely in my own constituency, where now 30% of the population are of Asian origin, that it can be very disturbing to people when they see change in front of their eyes, and we are dealing with that.
Sorry, can I try just one more time? Jack Straw,
dealing with that very well.
Can I just try one more time to get you to either answer the question no or yes, accept that the rise of the BNP, and the reason that Mr. Griffin is on this panel tonight is because of their success in the European Parliament, as you well know. They got 2 seats in Europe. Is that because of failings by your government over the last 12 years to reassure people about the scale of immigration, or not?
I don't believe it is. I think if you want to know why, and I said that right at the beginning, David, if you want to know why the BNP won in the Northwest and in Yorkshire in June, it was a lot to do with discontent with all the political parties, particularly over the issue of expenses.
I think, Jack, there are certain things that mainstream political parties have to be honest about, and I think that answer is not an honest answer. There are a whole series of issues which are affecting people who vote for the British National Party. I come from Dewsbury, where at the last general election we had the largest BNP vote anywhere in the country. I campaigned and I canvassed and I met many, many people who voted for the BNP. And there are real issues around poverty, around deprivation, around lack of social mobility and immigration. It is an issue. There are many people who feel that the pace of change in their communities has been too bad and that has been too fast, and that the government has not properly resourced those particular areas to respond to that change. Now, we can do one of two things.